Welcome, everyone. This is our 10th webinar about the CSA Z1011, the Work Disability Management System Standard. And in today's session, we're going to continue the conversations about the insurer's perspective. The agenda for today is I'll be giving, Lina will be giving a brief introduction of the CSA Group and the standards development process. And then I'll follow with a high-level summary of the standard, giving a focus to the insurer's role. And then we'll have a fireside chat with our panelists, including questions and comments from attendees. Here are our speakers for today. Myself, Emile Tompa. I'm the director of the Center for Research on Work Disability Policy. Lina Lopez is representing the CSA Group. She was project manager for this CSA standard. And then we have Vincent Russell, who is Director of Employer Return to Work Programs at WorkSafe BC, and Joe Baiardo, who's Manager Paralegal with Canada Life and Ford of Canada. So Lina, will you take it away and speak about the standard development process for us?
Thank you for that. Hi, everyone. Good day. I'm Lina Lopez, and now I'm officially unmuted. I'm going to provide you with a quick summary of how standards are developed at CSA Group. So please hit next. Next slide. So CSA is a non-governmental independent organization, and there's two divisions at CSA. The one side, which is the one division, which is well recognized a lot of times in your household, and that's the commercial side. And that's where you can often find it, the CSA mark, whether it's on the hockey helmet or in your household appliances. The other division is the CSA Standards Development Organization. You can hit next, and then next again, and next again. And within the Standards Development Organization, CSA has 12 areas of focus. This particular standard that we'll be speaking or presenting on, the Z1011 on work disability management, it was developed by the technical committee within the occupational health and safety, although of course the standard does apply to and across all the areas of focus that CSA looks at. Next slide. So again, this particular standard falls into the OSH management system, a suite of standards that can work on each other. And then also, it also weaves into worker wellness. Next. So for the standards development process, this process is the same process regardless of the 12 areas of focus that CSA looks at. It starts off, and looking at it, it looks like a board game. So it starts off either an individual, an organization comes to CSA and presents a way that a process can be systematically organized and a process and procedures put into place. Then if I can just get you to hit next. And next again. So, and recognizing the CSA will work with the technical committee, a group of volunteers from various stakeholders, and we'll work together to draft a standard. And then it goes out to public review, and that's where it looks at the public's comments, inquiries, and then comes back together, creates some revisions, and then through an accredited process, it will then go to become a published document, will often be translated into French, and then it is maintained for approximately 5 years in maintenance. So the public can come back to the technical committee, ask questions, ask interpretations, and this is where the technical committee will continuously work on creating an opportunity to enhance the standard for the next version. Next. Next again. And next again. Often the questions we get asked is, CSA is non-governmental, so are these standards mandated? Are they put into legislation? And so since CSA is non-governmental, they are volunteer by nature, but once a standard is quoted by government or authority having jurisdiction, it then becomes, and it is adopted. Reasons it's adopted, I'm looking at here, two popular ones is that the standard was developed by various stakeholders. It has gone through that rigorous process and it's been developed by consensus. Next. So in addition to the getting involved on a standard, there's other opportunities and ways to get involved. So I should not have the opportunity to be part of the technical committee. The public, we do provide an opportunity for input during the public review process, as well as CSA has a CSA site. It is open, you just have to register, but it is free. And at that point, you can keep engaged with standards that are being developed or ask any questions about the standard on an open community. Next slide. So thank you very much. And then Emile, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, so I'm just going to give a bit of an overview of the CSA Z1011. On this slide, I have a list of the key actors in the development of the standard. Myself, Emile Tompa, chaired the technical committee that developed the standard. There was 2 vice chairs, Aminias Danny and David Brown, and the CSA project managers were Lina Lopez and David Shanahan. There were 26 voting members and several non-voting members. And the members of the technical committee represent a diverse stakeholder group. Expertise were coming from employer representatives, labor and unions, injured and disabled worker representatives, health and safety professionals. We had return to work specialists. We had experts in work disability prevention. And then we had work disability insurance and program providers, which is the focus of our session today. And then we had some academics and researchers such as myself involved. This is the list of the technical committee members. It's quite a long list. You'll see their affiliations alongside of their names. The 2 people who are on our panel today, Joe Baiardo is from the Canadian Vehicle and Manufacturers Association and represents Ford of Canada, Oakville, Ontario, Canada, and Vincent Russell from WorkSafe BC, which is in Vancouver, British Columbia. So what is the problem? So the motivation for developing this standard is that the annual cost of work disability is estimated to be between 1 to 2 trillion worldwide. It's a huge economic burden. In Canada alone, recent estimates of the cost of exclusion have identified the total Canadian burden at 337 billion or 7.6% of GDP. Now that's across all social domains, but the work component itself, the productivity and output losses from work were estimated at 3.2% of GDP. So that's a substantial sum because we're not doing a good job of accommodating workers in the workplace when their health needs arise and require some accommodation. The prevalence of chronic and episodic disabilities are increasing with the aging of the labor force, and disability associated with poor mental health is also on the rise. All reasons for thinking about how organizations can better manage disability in the workplace. There's also high levels of unemployment amongst persons with disabilities, and that is part of the standard, thinking about how we can do a better job of recruitment, hiring, and onboarding of persons with disabilities. The current practice for work disability prevention management is quite varied currently. It's piecemeal. It's often not based on an organizational-wide approach. So this standard really promotes taking it to the management systems level and developing a proactive systems-wide approach to this work disability management. So the purpose of the standard is to develop a consensus-based framework for the management of work disability at the organizational level to address both physical and mental health needs of workers. It's broadly scoped, so it's not about a particular type of disability. It's both physical and mental health disabilities, and it's not focused exclusively on work-related injuries and illnesses. It's broadly scoped to include all health needs of workers. The relevance for management is for both work-related and non-work-related health needs. So workers' compensation comes into play, but so does private disability insurance. It includes both consensus-based guidance for recruitment, hiring, and onboarding of workers with disabilities, which is something we're pleased to have included in this standard. Supporting materials are also provided in an annex to the standard, including some implementation tips. Now, the traditional approach that organizations have used to address work disability was to assign it to a particular person, a disability manager, or somebody in HR or the Occupational Health and Safety Department. That person would handle workers' compensation claim possibly separately from non-work-related injuries and illnesses. Some organizations even farm out disability management functions. They often take a reactive approach to performance measurement using indicators such as absence days. Now, the systems approach takes a completely different angle to this. It's proactive. It considers the roles and responsibilities across the organization. It considers inputs, the process, outputs, and feedback. And evaluation and improvement is a critical part of it. So continual improvement on a regular basis, revisiting how an organization can do better in its work disability management policy, programs, and practices. So what is a management system? This is a question we get a lot from people because it may be new to some people, the notion of a management system. It's a formalized framework of policies, processes, procedures used by an organization to meet its objectives. It's documented and tested, a step-by-step method aimed at smooth functioning through standard practice. And audits are a really vital part of a management systems approach. And ideally, organizations have frameworks in place to address all of its core aspects of organizational activities, including work disability management. So the systems approach to work disability management ensures that there's clarity, consistency, and integration with other organizational activities. Now, the standard promotes a proactive approach. It addresses the health needs of workers before they become disabling. And so sometimes we use the terminology of work disability prevention, where we're trying to prevent a health condition from being disabling, whether the health needs arise from exposures at work or elsewhere. So the management system model is, I'm going to describe this in the next few slides. It begins with policies, where policies play a fundamental role in clearly giving direction for organizational flows. The organization then requires a management structure needed to put in place and deliver on those policies. It requires a planned and systematic approach to implementing policies. And then emphasis given to measurement of performance against targets identified to reach improvement targets. And then there's a review and learning from those experiences, which are fundamental to that continual improvement process. So sometimes we think of it as the plan, do, check, act process, which is a framework that's used to promote the continual improvement cycle, where at the planning stage, you establish those improvement targets or objectives. At the implementation stage, you're doing the activities that require you to implement those targets. You monitor and evaluate in the check stage, and then you review and take action and make improvements where necessary. When you reach those targets, you start the cycle again on a periodic basis. Now, the framework for the CSA standard is broad to facilitate integration with all other organizational activities. It's designed to be integrated with other Canadian international standards, including the CSA Z1011, the Occupational Health and Safety Management Standard, the CSA Z1003, the Psychological Health and Safety in the Workplace Standard, and ISO 9001 Quality Management System Standard. These are all management system standards. There's others out there as well. This is meant to dovetail with whatever standards an organization has already adopted. It's meant to take a systematic organizational-wide approach, as I've emphasized. It also emphasizes joint management and integration with other activities and responsibilities. It uses a common language and terminology wherever possible, drawing on the vocabulary of other standards. And it's meant to be voluntary. It's intended to serve as guidance that specifies best practices above the minimum requirements of the law. There are 6 guiding principles at the foundation of the standard. The first principle is focusing on an evidence-informed, data-driven approach that is strategic in nature to ensure sound policies and processes. The second principle is a focus on inclusion and accessibility to promote engagement and belonging. The third one is taking a worker-centered approach, supportive approach that is contextualized and dealing with things on a case-by-case basis. The fourth one, promoting accommodation and early return to work that considers the essential duties of the worker's role within the organization. The fifth, joint responsibility between the organizational management, the worker and the workforce, and worker representatives where applicable. And the sixth one is legal compliance is applicable within an organization's jurisdiction. Now, these principles apply for all worker health needs, regardless of cause, and also for recruitment, hiring, and onboarding of persons with disabilities. In terms of generalizability, the standard is meant to be generic and designed to be adaptable to the specific context of an organization. It's applicable to organizations in Canada of any size, whether they're in the private sector or public sector, whether they're for-profit or not for-profit. and regardless of what sector they're operating in. It considers both physical and mental health needs of workers, regardless of cause. And the standard describes the what, and implementation is about the how. So there are some implementation tips provided in the annex to the standard. Now, management and organizational roles and responsibilities. So senior management is meant to provide commitment to the development, implementation, and maintenance of the disability management system standard. They're supposed to provide the appropriate resources, define and communicate the roles and responsibilities, provide the required support where needed, facilitate worker participation and consultation, and provide leadership and accountability. They also establish a framework for regular reporting about the standards performance, about the management system's performance. In terms of organizational responsibilities, they encourage collaboration, ensure access to timely information, ensure supervisors have the skills and abilities to address worker health needs, and ensure rights to privacy and responsibility for inclusion and accessible workplaces. So in this slide, I have an overview of the table of contents of the standard. And as you can see, there's a number of key chapters from 0, where we provide an introduction, through to chapter 7, which is the part of the Plan, Do, Check, Act component. 7 is performance monitoring and evaluation, continuous improvement. And then we have a number of informative annexes. I've highlighted the one about the role of experts. That's where the insurers' roles are described at length. They are noted in several places in the standard elsewhere as well, but the key parts where we're thinking about external experts are described in that annex. So in terms of the introduction, the challenges and opportunities in effective management of work disability, I've just taken an excerpt out from this introductory section on module 3. Now, the work disability management system is described as a complex process with multiple stakeholders within and outside the organization, including a range of insurance programs and support service providers. These can include workers' compensation insurance, private short and long-term disability insurance, employment insurance. There's Canada Pension Plan disability programs that come into play, and employer group benefits plans. It's a complex arena, and so it's really important to think about all of these stakeholders that are involved in the work disability policy system. Some organizations view their roles, as I mentioned, as that of a passive purchaser of insurance and support services. Hence, their practice in this area are often very, as I mentioned, piecemeal and not based on an organizational wide approach. And now, conversely, we're promoting organizations taking a coordinated, proactive, organizational-wide approach to work disability management systems to ensure optimal performance and outcomes. So here I have the layout of the 4 core modules that frame the Plan, Do, Check, Act process. Chapter 4 is about the work disability management system. Chapter 5, we're into planning. Chapter 6, we're into implementation. And Chapter 7, performance monitoring, evaluation, and continuous improvement. So in Chapter 4, this section really emphasizes the involvement of all key stakeholders, which is essential to good performance of the work disability management system. It includes senior management, frontline managers and supervisors, internal subject matter experts, disability management specialists, healthcare professionals, workers, and their representatives. Chapter 5, the planning module, this section really emphasizes the need for organizations to understand its strengths and identify areas for improvement. So they want to develop a vision for the future, consider the organization's unique situations and capacity, and engage all of the stakeholders in the process. Chapter 6 on implementation really emphasizes the importance of well thought out plans to achieve success. It emphasizes a proactive approach and culture change. There's subsections on accommodating workers with disabilities in recruitment, hiring, and onboarding. It really notes the importance of promoting an inclusive, non-judgmental environment towards workers with disabilities, and notes the importance of ensuring workers are not reluctant to reach out for assistance when they need it. Then Chapter 7, performance monitoring, evaluation, and continual improvement. This section really emphasizes the importance of performance measurement. As we all know, what gets measured gets done. So really important to monitor and evaluate performance outcomes. It notes the requirement of reviews, audits and continual improvement in recruitment, hiring, and onboarding, as well as accommodation. It emphasizes the use of both qualitative and quantitative data in the evaluation process, and it notes the importance of addressing deficiencies identified on a timely basis. So now we'll turn to our panelists, Vincent Russell and Joe Baiardo. If you'll turn on your microphones and your video. Welcome, Joe. Welcome, Vincent.
Hello.
Good morning.
So, good morning. And let's start off with a brief bio from both of you. We'll start off with Vincent and then Joe, if you'll give a bit of background about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, sure thing. My name is Vincent Russell. I'm with WorkSafe BC. I've been with WorkSafe BC for a long time. I started off originally as a voc rehab, and then kind of worked my way up over the ranks. And I've done a lot of work over the years in developing return to work programs. I've been a director here, both on the prevention and on the claims side. And as Director of Industry and Labor Services, we promoted the Certificate of Recognition, which had a return to work component for core. I also developed and led the Return to Work Services Department. I developed and led the Risk Analysis Unit Department, which is a group that looks at risks that are out there that might not be obvious and how we might address those. And I also developed and led the Employer Return to Work Programs Department. I was the lead for the development of the 3 pillars of case management, which is our approach that we take to place the worker front and center of their recovery and their return to work. So return to work is kind of woven through my career. And so I'm looking forward to participating in the panel today.
Thank you. Joe?
Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Joe Baiardo. I'm the manager paralegal with Canada Life at Ford of Canada, a fairly unique position in that I'm working with 2 major corporations in the disability management field in particular. My history and my background, I started out in the disability management, career, going back as far back as 83, I think it was, when I worked as an orderly at the Downsview Rehab Center while going to university. And little did I realize that my career would end up in the workers' compensation adjudication field, and then into the disability management consultant field, working with the healthcare industry, and then consulting on my own for various companies. And now over the past 20 years with Canada Life at Ford of Canada. My team deals with disability management services, return to work services in particular on the occupational side. So I'll have a lot more to say on that. But thank you for inviting me and to participate in this. And of course, it was a real honor to be involved in developing this standard.
Well, thank you both. Impressive backgrounds. You know, it's incredible to see the years of experience we had on this technical committee. Really impressive. So I've prepared some questions for you to speak to, and I just want to remind the audience who's attending this session to do take the initiative to ask questions through the chat function or through the questions and answers section of the platform, and Lina will be monitoring those and trying to get those questions into the panel as we have the opportunity to do so. So thanks, Lina, for coming back on. We'll start off with our first set of questions that I posed to the panel. We'll start off maybe with you, Vince. Can you consider the key challenges insurers experience in supporting employers in the work disability management process? And there's some other sub questions I have here. What are some of those key challenges that they experience as organizations have to deal with their claims that arise through maybe workers' compensation in the case that you're probably handling a lot of? Do these challenges vary by organizational size, and how common are they? And how might organizations be more proactive in the management of work disability in this area? And how might they adopt a management system standard to help promote better management of work disability compensation claims?
A lot of questions.
Yes, there is a lot there. Sorry.
So the challenge that we have in, let's call it, energizing employers around return to work is that they're so busy running their business that remains their short-term focus. So they're not always thinking about the cost, because often these costs come in after the fact. They're busy. Somebody's injured. They're off. They need somebody on the production line. They bring somebody on the production line. That person that's off, those costs will manifest themselves a year down the road and have increasing implications as it goes on. But they're in the future, and so they're not looked at. So one of the big challenges that we have is making the business case for employers that this is in fact good business. Now, we've been doing this for several years, and so now we have lots of tools that we can do it. But that's one of the big challenges that we have is getting them energized on that. And in terms of does it vary from industry to industry? Of course, yeah, it absolutely does. We find like manufacturing companies or companies that are more stable, that have a workflow that's more stable, are better suited, or it's easier for them to accommodate workers. Whereas workers that are working at different locations, or where the work varies, for example, in construction, where every day the work required is different as the building gets built. That is more of a challenge. But there's two messages I wanted to leave with the group, so I'm going to get them in the first question if I can, and that is because I'm hoping that there's people from compensation systems on the line, and I think that workers' compensation boards, we tend to think of ourselves, we tend to say, we do return to work, and my message has been, we don't do return to work. Compensation boards don't do return to work. Employers do return to work. And we need to shift ourselves away from this notion that we believe that we do the work and empower employers to do the return to work, because it's employers that own the employment relationship. They've already hired these workers. And when we talk to them about these things, we try to make the point that there are sunk costs. You've already invested in this individual. You know this individual. They know your business. It's an investment you've already made, and it's an investment that you should continue on. So there are challenges. There's the financial challenges. There's the fact that the employer is so busy doing the work, they're not focused on it. There's the challenge that they're not aware of the cost, both financial and in terms of their business, reputational, and in terms of production. So they're not always aware of those things. And I think the other challenge that we have, for whatever reason, employers think, well, the worker's injured, it's off to someone else. It's not my responsibility to take care of. And our message is then, no, it is your responsibility. You don't need to wait for workers' compensation systems to take it. You already hired that person. You already did lots of work with that individual before. And we're going to get to this a little later on, but you deal with these issues all the time. So yes, it's your responsibility. So I'd say those are the main challenges we face. And I do think that they vary from industry to industry. Again, those industries that are more stable or located in one location are better at doing it. And in terms of the point number 5 here, how does an adoption of a management system help them overcome these challenges? What it does is, I hate to use this term because it's a little bit trite, but it systematizes the process. And what it does is it introduces it into processes they have already. They have an accounting system, right? They have an inventory system. They have a recruitment system. All we're asking on what this standard does is it just brings this into their other existing management systems that allow them to run their businesses effectively and to make money.
Joe, do you want to jump in there? Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, Emile, it's Joe. Definitely, I think with regards to the biggest challenge I see, and I'm sitting here nodding my head, everything that Vincent had already said, but I think the biggest challenge, particularly for all employers, is and it's the same challenge we have with convincing employers that the standard itself is an investment. And so I think insurance company in particular, as I'm wearing the Canada Life hat today, is to convince employers that the services provided by their insurance providers, and it's a whole vast range of services, to see that as an investment in their disability management process rather than a cost, because there's various ranges of services through the insurance companies. Some are strictly just an income replacement scheme, I call them, where it's the basics. If you have a non-occupational disease or non-occupational accident, then off you go on to SNA until you're 100% and come back, versus the workers' comp systems throughout the provinces where it's legislated, as Vincent said, and there's a system in place for that. But I'll have more to say that on the second question.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And do you find the same kinds of issues where convincing organizations that it's a good business investment to focus on these issues and be proactive? The business case kind of an angle to it?
You asking me, Emile?
Yes, yeah. Joe.
Yeah. I definitely, I think that's a big challenge because, and you know, on the second question, there is definitely a difference, I would say, throughout the province that employers have, because on the work-related side, workers' comp side, there is legislation in place. There are obligations, re-employment obligations in place for employers, and there are penalties if you do not follow. There are a duty to cooperate and things like that in terms of the legislation in each of the provinces' workers' compensation systems. Whereas on the non-OC side, many times even the unions are involved in the collective agreement in you know, basically spelling out how that the non-occupational system will work within their company, and which includes, you know, various sources that they too might see as a cost versus an investment.
So it seems just that you're suggesting that it's even more challenging to get organizations to be proactive because it's not as delineated as workers' comp with private insurance.
I would say, in a nutshell, yes.
Interesting. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like it's, you know, as Joe mentioned, it's kind of situational depending on the province. But we have, for example, because we're going to talk about unions. I know Joe's big on involving the unions, and we are as well, because that's when it becomes most successful. But we have had some, you know, there are some collective agreements where the union pays the LTD cost. And so there's big savings on that front as well. And, you know, I know, for example, with you know, healthcare employers, for example, their compensation costs pale in comparison to their LTD costs. And so we're kind of bleeding into the next question, but there's no doubt about it that these programs that you put in place are applicable across the whole spectrum, not only to, you know, to compensation, let's say, but to LTD cost and to other things as well. So I just think that the delineation of cost, what happens is sometimes they're compartmentalized. You know, the LTD costs go here, and someone else is managing the voc rehab costs and the claims costs. And sometimes one of the things we do with employers bring together all of those costs, and when you see them together, it's sometimes pretty shocking. So
all the more reason to think about being proactive about managing disability in the workplace. So we'll start off with you, Joe, with a question 2 about drilling down on promoting early and safe return to work. You know, so what are some of the issues organizations experience in terms of the challenges of doing a good job of early and safe return to work, and how does it relate to work-related and non-work-related injuries and illnesses? You know, obviously the side that you probably see more of is the non-OC, as you call it, non-work-related injuries and illnesses. But certainly very important to think about that, as well as I'm thinking about the distinction between physical and mental health illnesses as well. Do you think so? That's probably a growing area as mental health in the workplace issues that organizations grapple with. So, and think about then how organizations can be proactive to manage those cases well, as minimize the costs associated with work disability management.
Right. Yes, again, thank you. And again, from the previous question, as I indicated, I'm not sure if it's more of a conscious decision, but I think throughout Canada, the legislation is a driving force in terms of how much investment companies put into their disability management program. And by that, I mean the legislation on the workers' comp side. Most of my staff, for example, within Ford of Canada, they're all Canada Life employees, but they work within Ford of Canada, a fairly unique program throughout the country. But as Vince said, it's up to the employers to manage the work return to work. And we recognized over 20 years ago that it's the employer that we can help assist in the return to work program. So a great deal of our investment, or Ford's investment, has been concentrated on the occupational side. On the non-OC side, as I mentioned, through an agreement with the union, the collective agreement, there are limitations, I would say, brought in terms of having a robust return to work plan. Now, I'm not just mentioning this for our program, but I think this is part of the challenge that many organizations have in recognizing their disability management program for both occupational and non-occupational side, because there's an additional cost put to it with insurance companies, with Canada Life, for example. By the way, the big three in Canada, Ford is with Canada Life, General Motors is with, I believe, Sun Life, and Chrysler is with Manulife. So the big three automotive companies are with the big three insurance companies. And I have I guess, the advantage of being working with those other companies through the CVMA and understanding their similar disability management systems. And so that's I think the biggest challenge, to go back to the first, is convincing employers that you have a resource here, an insurance company that has a vast amount of resources available to them, not to see it as a cost, but rather an investment in your employees in terms of the return to work process. As far as like, for example, there's a difference to legislatively in programs, occupational versus non-occupational, and I go right off the bat to the level of benefits. As you know, most workers' comp benefits are 85 or 90% of their net average earnings versus 65% under the non-OC side, and the sickness and accident side, 65% of gross. So that right off the bat, there's a difference in terms of meeting the gap in terms of income once a disability, there's a resulting disability. The issues of pre-existing conditions play a role in the occupational and the non-occupational field, and also ongoing medical authorizations. You know, I think under the non-OC systems, the emphasis on having medical authorization to receive the benefits, I think is just as great as the occupational. But on the occupational side, it becomes an issue, a source of an adversarial process in terms of, well, was it work related? What pre-existing conditions, do they play a role in enhancing or prolonging a person's recovery? So there's a vast amount of issues that are involved under both systems, and I would go back to what Vincent said is that to have the employer recognize that the non-occupational side disability management system is part of the systemic approach, included into not making that much of a difference between occupational and the non-occupational disabilities. The other issue too is that under workplace health insurance policies versus non-occupational insurance policies, there's a great deal of resources placed on the mental health and illness areas. This has been an increasing trend over the past 20 years on the non-occupational side. And I know that under the Canada Life Book of Business, if you will, it is a trend that has been occurring throughout all industries, the mental health side. But here is another area where there are resources with your insurance companies that are free. Canada Life in particular has a site called Workplace Strategies for Mental Health. And there's a vast amount of information there to help people with mental health issues get through it, and even guidance to deal with your employer and your insurance company. So I think I'll stop right there, and if anybody has any questions, or Vince, you have anything to add?
Vince, you might speak to the growth of mental health issues that maybe I think workers' compensation systems are also grappling with this as well, and how that might change kind of the issues that workplaces need to think about in doing a better job of early and safe return to work.
Yeah, I guess, the reality in my view, certainly, and in our experience to date, is that the accommodation and the processes required to put in place a healthy return to work are the same, whether it's physical or mental health.
Mm-hmm.
You need many of the same structures. It's a different injury type for sure, and there's other considerations that you need to think about, like exposure and those kinds of things. So there's a different layer to it, but the foundation pieces are basically the same. And I think one of the challenges we have with mental health is, mental health is this big, and when people think mental health, they're thinking something catastrophic. Where if we were to say, well, and I know there's privacy issues, but just basis of examples, if somebody said Vince isn't at work today because he's depressed, his girlfriend left him, you might say, oh, I can actually relate to that, right? That happened to me, or whatever, and it makes it more. So I think what we need to do is need to make mental health needs to be normalized a little bit before we're going to be able to action it forward. But as it relates to this program, the program elements are all the same. And so that's our message to employers. And, in terms of the question about, to use it for compensable and non-compensable, because we're using employers' money, we're funded by employers' money. So we were really focused on the occupational related injuries, but we'll tell employers, we'll say, you could clearly use this for your non-occupational, and in fact, for just basic injuries as well. As kind of a gateway conversation, we tell employers all the time, when one of your workers got injured, sprained their ankle playing baseball, on the weekend, you were able to accommodate them. You do this all the time. This is not net new.
Okay.
And then the other example that we give them all the time is we say, if you had Band-Aids and Emile came to me and said, I hurt myself on the saw, and Joe came to me and said, well, I hurt myself at home, we wouldn't say, well, I'm sorry, Joe, we're not going to give you the Band-Aid, right? So once that program is built, and then we use this as a selling point, obviously, it is easily used for all of both compensable and non-compensable, and for mental health. We've had employers come to us that wanted to focus strictly on mental health, but when we do the analysis and explore what systems they have in place, they didn't even have the foundational systems to deal with physical injuries. And so we said, no, we got to start there, and we'll build those other pieces. And you know, I think that a key element that we haven't talked about, and I don't know whether this is the right place or not, but we need to think about the role of the supervisor. I think often what happens is we build these programs, we get maybe, you know, whoever is in HR or safety or whatever involved, but it's the supervisors that make this work. And research shows, as you know, Emile, the role of the supervisor is so critical. And so I think it's, you know, I'd say to the people on the call, I think it's fantastic that you're looking at this. I think that this standard can act as a directional beacon. I think it's a good standard. But it's only going to go so far if you don't equip and enable your supervisors to be the people that can encourage the return to work, that have that attitude, that create that atmosphere of accommodation, both for physical injuries and mental health.
Excellent. I'm glad you're pointing that out, because we try to emphasize the fact that it's not just a person's role in HR or the occupational health and safety department or disability manager's role, that everybody plays a role, and particularly, as you point out, supervisors. It's also comforting the way you point out that once you have the infrastructure in place to address work injuries that are of a physical nature, it's not so different to think about mental health. Certainly there's other layers to consider, but the foundational principles of accommodation are pretty much the same across the board. Yeah. So you have that in place. It's not so scary to think about taking that next step of, you know, being more proactive with mental health and issues of your workforce.
It's Lina here.
Yes.
There's a question that's come in from the audience for both Joe and Vincent. The question is, does not every province have the duty to accommodate legislation? So I'm happy to repeat it. The question is, does not every province have the duty to accommodate legislation?
Yeah, as far, and Vincent's right in that in that business on the workers' comp side, but as far as I know, all provinces have similar legislation when it comes to workers' comp matters, and duty to accommodate. From what I understand, most provinces, I'm very well aware of the Ontario legislation, and we do have duty to accommodate, but there's duty to accommodate in, I would say, all of the legislation. Vincent, I know that the workers' comp boards have an overall system, but
no, well, you know, so in BC, credit to Ontario, and I'm going back because I used to work in the system in Ontario just about 30 years ago. So they under Bill 162, they did implement that in the 90s. But BC, for example, doesn't. We have a provincial duty to accommodate.
Right.
But what we find is for our workers, for example, that's a bit of a higher bar, and there's a different, it's a longer process and stuff. So so BC doesn't have it in their legislation, but I couldn't really speak to the rest of the. I wouldn't know what the other organizations.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I would imagine that the question was asked with duty to accommodate on the work-related side, or?
It was when the question number 2 was starting to be discussed. That's when the question came in. So if the audience member who submitted the question, if you'd like to add anything else, I'll be monitoring the chat or the Q&A feature.
Okay.
And I think in BC, one of the reasons that, I mean, we don't have it in our act, the Workers' Compensation Act. So that's one of the reasons that we're strong on the business case, because we don't have that hammer to use with the employers. So we're trying to make the case for that, for the cost, both financial and production and all the others that I spoke of.
But I should point out, I guess, that we, with the Z1011, it's meant to go above the minimum requirement of the law. So a proactive approach would suggest that you would think about accommodation of a worker's health needs, regardless of legislative responsibilities or not. It being proactive would mean that you would think about those issues as they arise.
Yeah.
Right.
Can we move to maybe question 3, coordinating work-related and non-work-related injuries and illnesses? And Vince, you started mentioning a little bit about this, where when you have the platforms in place, even if you put them in place for workers' comp type claims, that once you've had that in place, it works just as well whether your Band-Aid need is from a work event or a non-work event. And I guess that's a great way to frame it, because, you know, if a worker comes forward needing something, you know, because of their health issues, you know, it doesn't matter what the source of that or the cause of it is, you know, you have the systems in place to help support, you know, accommodating that worker's needs.
Yeah, I mentioned there was two things I wanted to make sure that I snuck in. So I snuck the first one in.
Okay,
the
go
beginning,
for
which is
it.
that we don't do we don't do return to work. Employers and unions do
Yeah.
return to work. So that was the first thing. We facilitate that. But my second message that I wanted to weave in was that, you know, being able-bodied, that's what's temporary, right? We tend to think of, you know, disability as being temporary or impairment as being, but being able-bodied is what's temporary. If we think back, think back to when you were 18 or maybe, you know, to 18 to 24 or whatever that. But since that time, many of us have had, you know, perhaps we've had, you know, a bike accident where we were hurt, or a strain when we were working in the garden, or any number of those things. And so I think it's important for us to realize that. It's important for employers to realize that, because what it means is they are going to run into situations where their workers that they value, that they need to run their production, are not going to be able to do the work as they normally do because they've been injured or incapacitated in some capacity. It's going to happen. And it doesn't matter whether it happens for work-related reasons or not work-related reasons. You know, you're going to need to accommodate these things. And particularly, Emile, you mentioned it at the beginning, you know, the workforce is aging, and we're seeing a higher incidence of these things. So it just makes sense for employers and unions to turn their minds to this, because unions are going to run into the situation as well, where their members are not going to be able to do their work as they could before because of some type of injury. So we've been sharing the message to employers that, look, this is going to hit you any number of ways, and what we're going to help you with is going to help you with all of those pieces, not just the compensable related ones.
Great message, Vince. Joe, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, again, I agree with Vince's comments, and in particular, I think a sense of empathy, which I humbly have to admit, earlier this year on January 2nd, shoveling my snow, I had that tweak in my back, and boy, I was out for at least a good week. Couldn't do anything, couldn't get in and out of bed and so on. But here I am as a manager of this disability management program, and I know how proactive my staff is. They would have been on the phone the next day to get me back to work. And I understand now, I would not have been able to say yes to a return to work plan had I been working on the line, you know, at Ford. So having that sense, I think we talked about this in past sessions, that having that empathy, understanding the disability management process, that part of that disability management process is the recovery period, acute period, and then of course there's the rehabilitation process and return to work process, which is part and parcel of the rehabilitation process, I think. So definitely there is issues of whether or not it happens in the workplace, and I agree entirely with Vince in having incorporated that into the particularly this standard into your internal responsibility system. Because of legislation, very much workers' compensation, disability management processes are part and parcel of a company's internal responsibility system and follow-up program, cost management system that goes with it. And oftentimes the non-oxide, because of various restrictions, primarily sometimes through the collective agreement, and sometimes through not a recognition that this is more of an investment rather than a cost, upfront cost to your system, is something that we I think would encourage employers to look at and incorporate non-OC and occupational together.
Thank you. And I see there's another question from the audience.
Yeah, there's another question that just came in, and it's regarding TDA, regarding employment by the employer for a non-work related disability. Ex-worker has a visual disability that he just was diagnosed with, but this made that he could not do the job. So this might be related to the duty to accommodate legislation.
So what happens in that kind of case, I guess?
Yes, I think they're just asking for some guidance. So once again, regarding employment by the employer for non-work related disability, ex-worker has a visual disability that he just was diagnosed with. This made it that he could not do the job.
Yes, because we were talking within the standard, I mentioned in my opening presentations about being able to do the essential duties of your job. So what do you do in these kinds of situations when the person is unable to take on the essential duties of the job?
Yeah, and under human rights legislation, employers are encouraged to accommodate, and particularly under workers' comp legislation, accommodate to the point of undue hardship. So that's an issue that employers have, that they cannot just push aside a non-occupational claim because it wasn't work related. So we do, most employers have the responsibility to accommodate and try their very best to re-employ that individual, even though it cannot do the essential duties of the job, if there are other aspects that hopefully, if it's temporary or permanent, we'll decide on how to accommodate that employee. Otherwise, the advantage of working with an insurance company is that their benefits can be covered, and then the rehabilitation process can occur, and there are other accommodations.
And you're talking about vocational rehabilitation there?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And Vince, what would happen in if it was a work-related event that caused the disability?
Well, this is an area I think that where we can add value, because we have a lot of experience around the types of accommodations that could be made. I mean, the employer doesn't necessarily know that, how that job could be modified, but we have, not only can we bring experts to bear, but we have a bunch of experience, and we're willing and we do pay for all kinds of accommodations as well. So this is where we can help the employer say, okay, this is beyond what you normally deal with. Let's bring in some experts to help with those things, whether those be physical accommodations, whether those be adaptive, whether that's adaptive equipment, whether that's training and orientation for the worker in different ways, or even in some cases we have redone workstations. So we've got big levers that we can move, and we're happy to help employers with those types of situations.
Excellent. Well, we have 1 minute left, so if you might each give a very brief kind of final summary comment or statement. Joe, we'll start with you, and then Vince, to just leave a message for people to take home.
Yes, thank you again for this opportunity. And once again, I think the main message that I want to get across is that this standard certainly helps employers recognize that investing in disability management and the disability management process will help not only their bottom line, but will also help their employees in terms of their workplace health, their mental health, and their work-life balance.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Joe. Vince?
I would just say that, it's a great standard, as Joe has said. I think it's a great directional beacon for helping you set up the structure. I wouldn't be intimidated by it. I know that it can be daunting because it's a fairly big document, but you can start small. get senior managers or senior leadership to buy into the concept. Recognize that many of the things in here are already happening in your process anyway, in terms of hiring, onboarding, and that. This is just wrapping it around a system, providing a systematic approach, wrapping it in a system. And I would say that you can empower your supervisors, and you can start small. So don't let this be intimidating. It's a good thing to do.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you, Joe. Thank you, Vince. It's been an excellent
Thanks for having us.
discussion. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
It was very informative. I really appreciate your time and your knowledge that you're sharing with the audience. And I just want to remind the audience that we're continuing this webinar series. There's a webinar on March 22nd where it's conversations on the labor perspective. There's another one in April 26th, continued conversations on the health care and disability management services perspective. And a third one will be on May 10th on conversations on the labor perspective. So please join us for those sessions going forward, and have a great day and great week. Thanks, everybody. And thanks,
Thank
Joe,
you.
Vince, and Lina. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Take
you.
care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.